friends, welcome back to my house. It's another day and time for another read aloud with The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Today we're going to be reading chapter 22 and chapter 23. But before we dive into our new chapters, let's think back to what happened in our previous chapter. So, previously on chapter 21 in The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. When last we left off, Bryce had finished grieving over poor Sarah Ruth, and he took Edward and the money he had earned by making him dance on the streets in Memphis, and he went to get something to eat. And we know that boy was starving. He had not had anything decent to eat, who knows, maybe his whole life, and just had little bits here and there, and usually by his own earning. So he goes to a diner called Neil's Diner, and he orders lots of food. Now, that's okay if you have money, but the problem was he didn't pay attention when he was ordering to the prices of the food, and unfortunately, he didn't have enough money to pay for the amount of food that he ordered, and the owner was not sympathetic with him for not having enough money. Even when Bryce tried to make Edward dance to earn the money, it did not impress him, and the owner, Neil, grabbed up Edward by the feet and slung him so hard by the feet, and his head hit the counter. And the last thing we heard was that his whole world went black. So we're picking up there today. I had asked you guys to make a prediction on what you thought was going to happen. You had very good predictions. I appreciate that. Well, let's see if you were right, or if you were in the right direction, or if it was completely different than what you thought. Let's dive in. But before I do, grab your papers and pencils, get ready to jot your thoughts as you listen to these two great chapters. I want you to be listening for this detail. Does Bryce lose Edward? And if he does, how does Edward feel about losing Bryce? And how does Bryce feel about losing Edward? All right, let's dive in. Chapter 22. It was dusk and Edward was walking. Remember last, everything was black. Down a sidewalk, he was walking on his own, putting one foot in front of the other, without assistance from anybody. He was wearing a fine suit made of red silk. He walked down the sidewalk, and then he turned onto a path that led up to a house with lighted windows. I know this house, thought Edward. This is Abeline's house. I'm on Egypt Street. The cover is a picture for this chapter. So I'm going to show it to you real quick. You'll see he's in his red silk suit, and he's walking up to the door of Abeline's house. He's walking. Has Edward been able to walk before? Keep that in mind while you're imagining this. And as you're predicting, as you're listening, your mind is constantly predicting. Lucy came running out the front door of the house. Lucy. Barking and jumping and wagging her tail. Down, girl, said a deep, gruff voice. Edward looked up, and there was Bull standing at the door. Bull! Hello, Malone, said Bull. Hello, good old rabbit. Hello, good old rabbit pie. We've been waiting for you. Bull swung the door wide, and Edward walked inside. What do you think is happening? He's seeing everybody that he loves. Abilene was there, and Nellie, and Lawrence, and Bryce. Susanna, called Nellie. Jangles, said Bryce. Edward, cried Abilene. She held out her arms to him, but Edward stood still. He looked around the room. You searching for Sarah Ruth? Bryce asked. Edward nodded. You got to go outside if you want to see Sarah Ruth, said Bryce. So they all went outside, Lucy and Bull and Nellie and Lawrence and Bryce and Abilene and Edward. Right there, said Bryce. He pointed up at the stars. Yup, said Lawrence. That is the Sarah Ruth constellation. He picked Edward up and put him on his shoulder, just like old times. You can see it right there. Edward felt a pang of sorrow, deep and sweet and familiar. Why did she have to be so far away? If only I had wings, he thought, I could fly to her. He's wished for wings a lot. Out of the corner of his eye, the rabbit saw something flutter. Edward looked over his shoulder, and there they were. the most magnificent wings he had ever seen, orange and red and blue and yellow. And they were on his back. They belonged to him. They were his wings. What a wonderful night this was. He was walking on his own. He had an elegant new suit, and now he had wings. He could fly anywhere, do anything. Why had he never realized it before? His heart soared inside of him. He spread his wings and flew off Lawrence's shoulders, out of his hands, and up into the nighttime sky, toward the stars, toward Sarah Ruth. "No!" shouted Abilene. "Catch him!" said Bryce. Edward flew higher and Lucy barked. "Malone!" shouted Bull. And with a terrific lunge, he grabbed hold of Edward's feet and pulled him out of the sky and wrestled him to the earth. "You can't go yet," said Bull. "Stay with us," said Abilene. Edward beat his wings, but it was no use. Bull held him firmly to the ground. "Stay with us," repeated Abilene. Edward started to cry. "I couldn't stand to lose him again," said Nellie. "Neither could I," said Abilene. "It would break my heart." Lucy bent her face toward Edward's. She licked his tears away. Now, we're about to go into the chapter 23. That was the end of chapter 22. Here's the picture to start chapter 23. What do you think has happened? Do you think he was dreaming? Do you think he was asleep? Do you think he was trying to pass away? He's a toy, remember? Let's find out. "Exceedingly well made," said the man, who was running a warm cloth over Edward's face. "A work of art. I would say a surpassingly, unbelievably dirty work of art, but art nonetheless. And dirt can be dealt with, just as your broken head has been dealt with." Edward looked into the eyes of the man. "Ah, there you are," the man said. "I can see that you are listening now. Your head was broken. I fixed it. I brought you back from the world of the dead." "My heart," thought Edward, "my heart is broken." No need to thank me," the man said. "It's my job, quite literally. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Lucius Clark, doll mender, your head, may I tell you? Will it upset you? Well, I always say the truth must be met head on. No pun intended. Your head, young sir, was in 21 pieces. 21 pieces, Edward repeated mindlessly. Lucius Clark nodded. 21, he said. All modesty aside, I must admit that a lesser doll mender without my skills, might not have been able to rescue you. But let's not speak of what might have been. Let us speak instead of what is. You are whole. You have been pulled back from the brink of oblivion, big juicy word, oblivion, by your humble servant, Lucius Clark. And here, Lucius Clark put his hand on his chest and bowed deeply to Edward. This was quite a speech to wake up to, and Edward lay on his back trying to absorb it. He was on a wooden table. He was in a room with sunshine pouring in from high windows. His head, apparently, had been in 21 pieces, and now was put back together into one. He was not wearing a red suit. In fact, he had no clothes at all. He was naked again. And he did not have wings. And then he remembered Bryce, the dinner, Neil swinging him through the air. Bryce! You are wondering, perhaps, about your young friend, said Lucius. The one with the continually runny nose, yes? He brought you here, weeping, begging for my assistance. Put him back together again, he said. Put him back together. I told him, I said, young sir, I'm a businessman. I can put your rabbit back together again for a price. The question is, can you pay the price? He could not. Of course he could not. He said that he could not. I told him then that he had two options, only two. The first option being that he seek assistance elsewhere. Option 2 was that I would fix you to the very best of my considerable abilities, and then you would become mine. His no longer, but mine. Here Lucius fell silent. He nodded, agreeing with himself. Two options only, he said, and your friend chose option 2. He gave you up so that you could be healed. Extraordinary, really. It is extraordinary when a friend puts the feelings or well-being of another friend before their own feelings. I know it had to be terrible for Bryce to lose Edward, but Bryce must have loved Edward so much that he was willing to put himself aside, his loneliness aside, just to have Edward repaired because he cared about him that much. Lucius Clark clapped his hands together. Bryce, thought Edward. But no worries, my friends, no worries. I fully intend to keep up my end of the bargain. I will restore you to what I perceive to be your former glory. You shall have rabbit fur ears and a rabbit fur tail. Your whiskers will be repaired and replaced, your eyes repainted to a bright and stunning blue. You will be clothed in the finest of suits. And then someday I will reap the return on my investment in you, all in good time, all in good time. In the doll business, we have a saying, there is real time and there is doll time. You, my friend, have entered doll time. That's the end of chapter 23. So, Edward and Bryce have lost each other. How does Bryce feel? How do you think Bryce is going to feel about losing Edward? And how do you think Edward feels about losing Bryce? I love you guys. I'll see you again tomorrow.